Hello, Jumbos. Welcome back to another edition of Perspectives in Oral Health. And today we have a really special treat for you. We have Dr. Pamela Yelick, who is a professor of genetics and doing some very interesting things with the dental technology and translational research. Thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Yelick.
My pleasure. Yeah.
So, genetics is a topic that I don't think that people associate with dentistry as much as we should. Can you tell us how you got into this field and also how you're making sure that your translational research helps oral health?
Yeah, so my past briefly, I guess I was trained as a developmental molecular biologist actually at Tufts. I got my PhD at Tufts in Medford in biology, where we were looking at haploid gene expression in forming germ cells in mice, sperm cells. So at the time, it wasn't known whether when you had a haploid cell, either an egg or a sperm, whether what was going on in the nucleus. And so that really got me, into this development genetics. Molecular biology field. And from there, you could apply it to anything that you wanted. And I then went on to do a postdoc at the Dana-Farber, working with stem cells there. That lab moved to Manhattan. My daughter was 2 at the time, very little, and I was a widow, and I didn't really want to move to Manhattan with her. So instead moved my NRSA postdoctoral fellowship over to Wally Gilbert's lab at the Harvard Biological Laboratories. And that's where I got introduced to the zebrafish model, which is a wonderful genetic model for human development and disease and regeneration. Zebrafish are highly regenerative. And so then when I went from that research associate position to my own independent position at the Forsyth Institute, which was located at the time in Boston in the Fenway, I brought the zebrafish as a model there to study craniofacial development and disease. And the PI that was conducting this large scale forward genetic mutagenesis screen at Mass General, Wolfgang Drever, kindly let me take some of these craniofacial mutants to work on in my own laboratory, and that was a great gift. So regarding genetics, so I think dentists are really in a prime position to be able to study genetically inherited um, craniofacial features, tooth loss, malformed features. You know all the family members, generally speaking, you meet them, the parents, and that is how um, it was identified that certain gene mutations are associated with certain phenotypes, like particular missing teeth, like a maxillary molar tooth was missing if you had a certain genetic disposition. And there are still many aspects of inheritance and association with craniofacial anomalies that we don't understand. And dentists are right there. They're in the
Mhm.
prime position to say that doesn't look right, and be able to, with permission, get blood samples from parents, grandparents, unaffected siblings, or whatever, which these days you can, sequence these genomes very inexpensively, very rapidly, and really quickly narrow down to whether you have a novel gene mutation that, might be the answer to all of these kind of um, diseases that we don't have any candidate genes for.
Mhm.
So I've been fascinated with genetics for quite a while, and
I think what's most interesting when I started hearing about the work that you're doing is just the breakthroughs that I see that are going to happen in the next 2 decades, the next 3 decades, even the next,
decade,
100 years. Yeah, even
maybe,
the next
yeah,
decade. Yeah.
yeah.
So, a lot of interesting technology is happening in every other field. And I know that one of the things that you're really passionate about is kind of regeneration and using the translational research that you've been pioneering to have some really direct effects on how general dentists will, even other specialties will have the ability to treat the oral cavities. So tell us a little bit about kind of what you're doing, that will have some direct effects for the way that we practice dentistry.
Right. So I'm going to back up just a tiny bit
Sure.
as to how I got into this. So I just said that I was trained as a developmental molecular biologist. And then, kind of in the late 1990s, I was at the Forsyth and I was hosting the seminar series for the semester or for the year or whatever it was. And one of our speakers was Dr. Joseph Vicanti, who is a pediatric liver transplant surgeon and also the co-founder, one of the co-founders of the field of tissue engineering and regenerative medicine. And he was at Mass General, and he, came over to the Forsyth Institute and gave this amazing talk that just blew my mind about regenerative medicine and how, all these efforts were being done. He was focused on the liver because he would have these babies that were born with diseased livers, and he worked very closely with Bob Langer, who is over at MIT, the chair of biomedical engineering there. And they were both over at Children's Hospital at the time in the same lab. And they decided to work together to say, well, could we just recreate something that would provide enough function for these babies to survive until a suitable donor liver became available? And they just combined cells and biodegradable scaffolds and growth factors to try to recapitulate some of the functions of the organ. And it just spread to everything. But when I was hosting Jay and I was responsible for getting him back in time, back to Mass General, had promised his administrator that I would get him back. We were waiting for a cab to come. There was something happening in Boston at the time. It was early April, and it might have been the marathon. I don't even remember what it was. No, it couldn't have been the marathon. But anyway, we were waiting and waiting for the cab to come, and I was like, Jay, I better drive you over. My car's right here. And he said, no, it's fine. We'll just sit. So we just sat on the steps of Forsyth and just talked about tooth regeneration. Like, could you actually apply all of these? Because I was studying craniofacial, molecular genetics at Forsyth. Could you regenerate a tooth or other oral tissues the same way? And Jay was like, sure. And when a seed grant was offered through the Harvard School of Dental Medicine for $65,000, because I had this wonderful conversation with Jay, I felt comfortable enough to ask him would he come work together with me on this grant, and he said sure, and we got the money. So that kickstarted it, and that was 1998 maybe.
So just a translation, many people who don't know this is
Oh,
that Dr. Yelick has been growing teeth in many different models, and not only growing teeth, but growing pulp tissue, growing really all of the components of teeth. So, which is one of the when I actually heard about this research, it blew my mind that this was even possible.
yeah.
And also, like you were saying, in the next few decades, this is going to become commercially available, which is something you're working on right now, correct?
Yes, for sure. So we started a company, as we've talked about, we started a company called Regenadent, end of March of 2022. It's almost 2 years old now. And we're focusing on a product called Regenda Gel. And my co-founder, Louise Bertassoni, is a dentist, bioengineer, biomedical engineer at the University of Oregon Health Sciences University, OHSU, Oregon Health Sciences University in Portland, Oregon. And he and I met when he was at MIT in Ali Hanum Husseini's lab working on these gelatin methacrylate hydrogels, which are a biodegradable material that you can tune to different stiffnesses and degradation speeds. And we were working with our dental pulp stem cells with that material to encapsulate the cells in it to try to make a pulp-like tissue or a bioengineered tooth with dental epithelial cells and dental mesenchymal cells. And Louise was also working on other applications. And when he moved to Oregon, we decided to apply, or he decided and invited me to work with him on applying for a a grant through the Michigan Pitt Weiss Regenerative Medicine Resource Center, which is one of two centers that were established by the NIDCR by the former director of the NIDCR, Martha Summerman. And her vision was that in an 8-year time period, so there was a 1-year planning grant for the resource centers, and we got one. I got one, Tufts for Tufts, but then we didn't get selected for the phase two to establish the resource centers, which is fine. But there were two, Michigan Pitt Weiss and the Sea Doctor. Louise and I got funding by the Michigan Pitt Weiss. So during the next phase 2 3-year and phase 3 5-year, over that 8-year time period, was to bring at least one new product to the clinic. That was the goal. And so
This product is amazing. I mean, I was lucky enough to see your presentation, and the idea that you can regenerate dental pulp, to me, again, blew my mind. I mean, right now, as many of you guys know, dental students, general dentists, specialists that are listening to this, we use gutta percha, which is non-biologic. It's something that is bioinert, but it's not something that exists in our body. But what if you could just regenerate that pulp tissue and restore some of the function, some of the feelings, some of the sensation of an actual tooth? I think that was really amazing to me because I never really thought about it like that. I thought that, the major focus of oral health for the 20th century was preventative. And then now all of a sudden it clicked that, maybe the 21st century could be regenerative.
oh yeah, oh yeah. So dentistry always lags a little bit behind medicine, of course, right? Having losing a tooth is not the same as a heart or something like that, or a brain. But again, I think that there are so many, it's just perfect timing for dental tissue regeneration right now, because we've learned so much from the field and all these other organs that have been developed, composite organ tissue regeneration, like jawbone and tooth, for example, or, periodontal ligament and, bioengineered tooth or natural tooth or regenerated tooth. It's just combined with all the new materials that have been made to really fine tune the properties to closely match natural dentin or natural enamel, to have similar stiffnesses and elasticities, instead of just really stiff porcelains that are going to break, that are going to crack.
So one of the things that you had talked about is that, the regenerative medicine is maybe a little bit ahead of regenerative dentistry. And, we're in Massachusetts, we're right across the river from some of like the greatest biotech companies in the world, really. How does oral health fit into all of that? Like, is it like basically what you're saying? It sounds to me like it's lagged behind a little bit.
Well, it has lagged behind, but also during the past 10 plus years, it's become more and more evident that oral health is essential for systemic health. So if you have somebody that has really persistent periodontal disease, bleeding, really bad ratios of the good and the bad microbiota in your mouth, you're going to, and now even more is understood about exosomes and secretomes, that you're swallowing these products that are produced by unhealthy cells versus healthy cells. So the bacteria and the cargo in these little secreted particles can lodge in various parts of your body. They can lodge on a heart valve, or they can contribute to dementia. They've been found to be associated with plaques in the brain, correlated with plaques in the brain. And so I think that despite the fact that dental health and dental tissue regeneration has lagged a little bit, there's really an understanding now of the importance, not to mention the whole psychosocial aspects of it. Poor nutrition, if you can't chew, if you can't eat, if you don't want to be seen because you have, teeth that are not aesthetic. I think so. There's much more of an awareness now. Mental health concerns over your appearance, your faces, your window to the world, right?
Yeah. I
So,
think that's certainly a an idea that is much more significant now than it was in the
oh
past.
yeah,
Um, But I guess my question in regards to where does oral health fit, like, are people having the same kind of funding for dental health technologies like you're making in comparison to medical, or is it, far less?
So, uh, for example, so these research centers I was talking about all have a dental focus. They're dental, oral, craniofacial, translational resource centers. So there needs to be a dental aspect to that, and that funding is focused on that. Now, that being said, like the NIDCR, National Institutes of Dental and Craniofacial Research budget is nowhere near as high as NCI, the Cancer Institute, or other institutes, and it
But
traditionally has.
but in regards to budget, um, there's certainly less researchers in the dental field than
Right,
in a field like that. So
right.
the reason why I say that is because the business of dentistry outside of the research industry is booming. I think that, knock on wood, for all those dentists that are out there, for all the dental students out there, we have entered into the profession at a real boom time. And I think that that's something that is partly due to the ideas that you're espousing. When people think about their oral health, they're thinking about their systemic health. And so
Hmm.
people are seeking out more dental care. There's more patient visits that are out there. The number of dentists is not necessarily able to keep up with the patient
No,
load.
no.
And so the amount of investment in someone's oral health per dentist is like a really, really good place to be in right now. Do you find that that's the case in the research side too? Because at least from my experience, we both went to this Forsyth Dental Technologies conference. I thought it was really significant. I thought I was blown away by the amount of interest in relatively small part of the research community, right?
Yeah.
Is that something that you've experienced as well?
Yeah, Forsyth is a great, has is great for sponsoring this Forsyth DenTech event. I think this was the fourth annual one that they had, and Forsyth just recently merged with the American Dental Association, so it's the ADA Forsyth now, which we'll see what happens with that. But there's a lot of exciting prospects out of it. Um, I think that there are, someone said to me at Forsyth Dentech, you have so many products like for your hair or for your skin. Like, how many products do you have for your teeth? You have toothpaste probably and a toothbrush maybe, and
Right.
that's about it.
Right.
And so I think that people are appreciating that there are all sorts of things that we could be doing better to maintain our oral health, and also how the oral cavity can be used to diagnose systemic issues. So saliva diagnostics, right? Um, all the, think COVID, but for your mouth, the COVID test, but for your mouth. Um, while you're sitting there in the dental clinic having your teeth cleaned, which takes time, right? Which is much longer than a visit to the doctor's office where your head is spinning and you're in and out in 5 minutes or whatever it is. You're going to be there for a little while. So you could do a lot of PCR diagnostics on for all sorts of things,
Yeah.
for diabetes, for oral cancers, for anything you wanted to,
Yeah. No,
for periodontal disease.
I agree. I think that it's something that Dr. Karen Bucks, our dean, is talking a lot about being a real significant impact in just the overall health of a person.
Yeah.
And I really feel like it's something that is gaining traction daily. And it's not something that I'm only seeing in the dental community. I'm also seeing it for my friends, my family members. They're telling me, my patients even.
Yeah.
But the reason why I wanted to highlight not only the work that you're doing, but just the dental research field in general is because I do think that we need clinicians that go into research
Yeah.
to really push the field forward. I think that that's, like you were saying, your partner in this particular company was a dentist also, or is a
He
dentist
is a
also. He
dentist.
is a
Yeah, he
dentist.
is. He was trained in Brazil. And my, right hand assistant professor in my laboratory, Dr. Weibo Zhang, is the DMD PhD. China for her DMD, and then she got her PhD in the Netherlands. And it's amazing to have, and it's completely essential to have input from both of those. I was chair of a Gordon research conference this past year, or 2022, I guess, called craniofacial morphogenesis and tissue regeneration.
Mhm.
And it's one of the few Gordon conferences. So Gordon conferences are pretty exclusive conferences. They're quite small, limited to 100 plus people at the most. So it's supposed to be kind of an intimate environment where you have a lot of free time so that you can interact with the other investigators that are at the meeting. And this is one of the few meetings that brings together both the clinicians and the basic scientists and the biomedical engineers. And so me and my co-chair worked very hard to make sure that we had representation of all these different people. And we got fabulous people there. We got Janice Lee from NIDCR, who directs the clinic at the NIDCR, just a lot of amazing speakers. And everybody was kind of from what they told me anyway, people were, really thrilled with the fact that all these different investigators were able to take the time to come to the meeting and participate and stay and interact and together kind of brainstorm about things to do together. And, I agree with you 100% that this whole translational um, effort is just booming now. It's just expanding. The problem, though, for clinicians who want to do research is that oftentimes they don't have protected time, right? Um, Research doesn't pay as well as clinical work does. And clinicians can have a lot of debt when they get out of school. And so whereas, a PhD doesn't have that debt necessarily. I certainly didn't. And so they're different drivers, even if you're completely passionate about research, how do you find that protected time and still pay back your loans and still support your family? And it's a challenge that we've been talking about as long as I've been in this field. So in the early 90s, when I started in this field, it was just kind of, we've been talking about the same thing. It's gotten a little bit better with loan repayment. And the NIDCR has worked very hard to push that because they really understand that. But we talk about it all the time. I'm just back from an International Association of Dental Research annual board meeting that was in LA, and it's a prime topic, not only to get loan repayments or forgivenesses, but also to have interest accrual not start until the student graduates. So for both for MDs and for DMDs, while they're in school, why should they be punished, penalized by having, taxes on and interest on these grants that they're getting, the loans that they're taking out? And we actually went to the Hill. So I'm also on the governance affairs committee for the IDR. I'm the vice president of the IDR. I should say, full disclosure, I'm promoting the organization. But we went to the Hill and talked to two congressmen and two representatives, and discussed face to face why this is important. And of course, the representatives that we went to and senators that we went to were already on board. Many of them were dentists, actually, are very aware of the dental field.
Yeah, how many of them are dentists,
I
right?
know.
Yeah, I had a chance to lobby for my national organization, the American Association of Oral and Maxillofacial Surgeons,
Yeah.
and there's like 4 or 5.
Yeah, there are.
Yeah,
There are across
pretty,
the bipartisan too.
right. Yeah,
Which
super
is
interesting.
great.
Yeah,
Which is so much fun.
but the whole idea that I wanted to present and also have you as one of the, preliminary guests on this podcast is that I'm sure that there are dental students or general dentists that are, tuning in that are thinking like, oh, why would I do anything other than private practice, right? And I think that there's academics, there's research, there's, even starting up your own business. Like one of the gentlemen at this conference that we went to was a dentist, and then he transitioned into fintech or financial technology, where he's doing some of like the software coding for financial transactions and insurance repayments and stuff like that. And I when I was in dental school, I didn't really realize there were so many other opportunities.
Yeah.
And I would love for other people to, especially research, which is something that I'm particularly interested in. I love learning about new stuff like you're doing. that there was a path for somebody like that. And I think it's becoming more tangible because of these income-based repayment
Yeah.
programs. Like, for example, my sister, she's a physician, and she had the opportunity to go into private practice or to go into academics. And she chose academics, and she just did the income-based repayment. And she paid back her loans at the same exact year that I paid back my loans,
Wow.
you know?
Great.
So there was no real detriment to
Good.
her doing this way. So I think that, for any of those who are listening and want to go into this, that should be a real path,
Oh
right?
yeah. Oh yeah.
It would be great if we had people like yourself who are PhDs in genetics and come over and make the oral cavity their particular field of interest. But I also hope that there is a path for people who are clinicians who maybe want to contribute in the same way that you're doing.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of talk. I know Dean Carabux is also very supportive of, trying to see whether we could have a DMD PhD program here, or how we could work that out, how we could, work together with the Graduate School of Biomedical Sciences, for example, that's just right around the corner from here, to come up with something that might be useful because, we are losing students to other schools that do offer those types of programs. And the other really good encouraging thing about this area for us for research is that a lot of students are getting introduced to research at a much younger age. COVID was the exception, of course, because everybody was kind of in lockdown. But a lot of undergrads and even high school students are getting exposed to research. And for those who have the bug, they don't want to give it up. We have more students in the lab this year than I think ever. I've been here for 17 years, and we have more students in the lab and wanting to come into the lab than ever before. So
Yeah.
first year, second year, third year, um, master's students here at the dental school. So it's after, kind of having this desert, this drought
Yeah.
during COVID. It's so nice.
What is your
It's just really fun.
hypothesis for why that's happening?
It's curious. I think maybe the importance of research in health, the prevalence of media advertising this. I mean, on your phone, you just get all the information about new advances. I think that the whole COVID vaccine development, right, that happened really quickly, really successfully, really effectively. And that gets back to your biotech um, interactions, how they can work together. Many of the graduate students that graduate from the Graduate School of Biomedical Sciences here at Tufts and other schools in the Boston area go work for biotech companies that are around here. One of the things that I really think we should work on is getting input back from these biotech companies to improve our infrastructure and our training and our teaching, because they're benefiting from this free education that they're getting in these highly trained, really competitive students. And they are willing to do so. They're willing to give back. We just have to figure out effective ways for them to do that. But I would love to see more interactions with biotech, with academic, with the dental school here, um, more opportunities.
Can I give you my hypothesis for why I
Yeah.
think it's more popular? I think genetics and biotech is just super hot right now. It's in the public consciousness. So I live in Cambridge, and I live across the street from this hotel that's oftentimes used because I live in Kendall Square, that it's oftentimes used as like a biotech conference center. And they had um this gentleman, I forgot his name, but he is working on Yamanaka factors and the whole idea of reversing aging.
Hmm.
And it was so popular that they had to call the fire marshal in because they were cramming all the people into this room
Oh wow.
like a Japanese subway station. It
Oh
was like
yeah.
so overwhelmingly popular. And I think that there's a lot of interest in genetics and regenerative medicine and all that stuff. Are you seeing that as well?
Oh
Like,
yeah.
yeah,
Oh yeah. It's so much fun. I mean, really, it's everywhere. You could spend your life just going to seminars and meetings. And the other thing that's really nice is that you can walk between Mass General, and the Harvard Medical School and MIT and Tufts. I mean, you can. You can, and I do. And it just makes it all even more accessible. Many of our students live, like you, in Cambridge or in Somerville or in other parts. You have to travel right by these other universities in order to get to Tufts, to get to work. And I think that does just attracts students to this area. I moved here right after I graduated from undergrad, and it's only better now with more students and more buildings and more biotech, more industry, more science. It's all fantastic.
Yeah, no, I think it's like it's truly like, it reminds me of like when Einstein would have like these throngs of people that are like, just so interested in what he has to say and all these different things that were available. Like science, especially research, is like really interesting. Again, I go to like a surgical conference, and the amount of interest that I saw at the research conference that we both attended was just at a much higher level than just a surgical conference where people are, doing show and tell,
Yeah.
telling them stuff. People are
Yeah.
more interested in like the breakthroughs that are coming on down the path. I wanted to focus on one of the breakthroughs for a second. I just want to talk about your research in stem cells for a bit. Um, can we grow teeth with stem cells? Is that
Yeah, we
something that's
can.
possible?
Yeah, we can. I mean, as we were talking before we started recording here, our first publication was in 2002 about bioengineering a tooth. And at the time, we were just using the approaches that were being used by other researchers working in different organs, which was to take progenitor cells. So we not embryonic stem cells, because embryonic stem cells are not going to be available to use if I needed to regenerate anything. So we always stuck with postnatal adult dental pulp stem cells, either from humans or from pigs or from any other animals we could get. And you can take those cells and expand them in vitro, cryopreserve them, and then thaw them when you're ready to use them. And we really just mixed dental mesenchymal cell, dental pulp stem cells, and dental epithelial cells from pig together in this hydrogel, or the first one we seeded onto a polyester scaffold because that was an FDA approved scaffold, these PGA, PLGA scaffolds. And then we just implanted them subcutaneously to provide it with a blood supply that would support the formation of this hard tissue. So teeth are very difficult. People consider teeth low hanging fruit because you can survive without them and they're pretty easy to obtain progenitor cells. You have to have wisdom teeth extracted oftentimes. But in fact, teeth are so highly complicated because not only do they form these precise soft tissue organs that go on then to elaborate this mineralized enamel and dentin and cementum that form these little teeth. You lose that baby tooth, your deciduous tooth, you exfoliate that deciduous tooth as your craniofacial complex is growing, and that tooth is replaced by an adult tooth that perfectly fits all the other, normally or oftentimes with a lot of luck, or generally speaking, with that occludes properly with the other teeth of your jaw. Now that is just completely fascinating. It's
Oh,
almost like magic.
yeah, it's so interesting. Like craniofacial growth to me, I mean that, I did a fellowship with craniofacial surgery. So to me, I just think like the whole interplay of how our face
Yeah.
forms and especially how our teeth forms kind of
Yeah.
fit together.
Yeah.
I still don't feel like I understand it. And I guess, as a professor of genetics, how much of it is determined by genetics and how much of it is determined by environment and things like that?
Right. So embryonically, there is a precise orchestrated signaling cascades that talk back and forth between the dental mesenchyme and the dental epithelium and the surrounding environment of the jaw. And we know a lot about that with beautiful, elegant work that was done using knockout mouse models and other models and things like that. But when you're talking about regenerating a tooth in an adult oral complex, you don't have all those signals that are present any longer. And so one of the things that I was so thrilled about in our first 2002 publication, is that these cells didn't have any other signals other than the ones that they were giving to each other. And they formed these little tiny, perfectly formed crowns that had it had pulp, it had predentin, dentin, and enamel that would form on these little small, but morphologically appropriate little tooth crowns.
Odontoma, or there's something like that was natural.
No, I mean it was a scaffold filled with little teeth. It didn't have other. It was definitely dental material, dental tissues that formed in this, but it wasn't like one big tooth. It was a bunch of little teeth, which formed actually in the pores of the scaffolds, which then taught us that what we need to do is learn how to guide the interactions of the dental epithelial and dental mesenchymal cells by having better types of scaffolds that are seated with one cell type or the other, but that they truly retained their natural characteristics to form these dental tissues, even after they had been expanded and cultured to tens of millions of cells, frozen down, rethawed, and then put back together again. They remembered how to do that in the same time too. So if you used like rodent cells, it would take 20 weeks. If you used porcine, cells, it would take 20 longer, and human cells. So they retained those characteristics, which was really astounding to me, and which also taught me that if you could just provide the cells with the right environment and then get out of the way, they'll do it themselves. And because it would be impossible to try to recapitulate all this fine tuned signaling that goes back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. If you were to impose that on cells, we don't have ways to do that now, but we don't have to either. So just providing them with the right environment and like a kickstart to get going, and then just leave them alone.
So is there a difference in the way that genetics contribute to tooth growth versus jaw growth?
So they're interconnected, very much so, embryologically again, and they need each other. I mean, in your field of expertise, you know that if you're trying to repair a cleft palate, for example, and you have teeth that are in the wrong place, ectopic teeth or supernumerary teeth or anything like that, and you need to remove those teeth from the roof of the mouth or whatever it is, you might also get bone resorption then afterwards, because the bone needs the tooth and the tooth needs the bone, right? So when we are moving into our tissue engineering strategies, having a jawbone tooth construct is perhaps more powerful an approach, more robust a model than just trying to grow this little tooth by itself. And the other advantage is that bone remodels very nicely. And so if you have bioengineered bone that is working together with your tooth to form the right structures, you know that tooth bone construct is going to get integrated in your jaw, because your jawbone remodels really, really, really well. And so that is a nice model too, I think, that has a lot of room for expansion. It's a close space. So, it certainly wouldn't be a big piece of bone, but you could imagine constructs that you could figure out a way to implant that would.
So I'm sure I speak for everyone that's listening to this when I'm asking, how far away are we from growing teeth and implanting them into a patient? Because I feel like right now we have implants, which are good, but they're not great, right? They're not the same thing as having a normal tooth.
No, they're definitely not. So I think a lot of work, a lot of beautiful work and elegant work has been done in pulp regeneration, including the work that my colleague Louise Bertassoni and I have done. A lot of beautiful, elegant work has been done on periodontal tissue regeneration, right? A lot of beautiful work has been done on bone regeneration. I think the harder parts are the time that it takes to form like a significant amount of dentin to support a crown, or a significant amount. Enamel is the whole other problem in that it's very difficult to get dental epithelial cells that can be differentiated into enamel producing ameloblast. You can do it. We've done it. You can coax uh, dental epithelial rest of say out of the PDL, for example, and then use those to be your.
By coax, how
Oh,
do you
yeah.
like whispering to it, playing nice music for
My friends, our friends,
yeah.
you culture them in media that promotes the growth. So dental epithelial cells grow in a specific media that's very different from what dental pulp stem cells grow in. So you can kind of tease them to grow into the cell types that you want, and then exactly.
Gotcha.
And this is in vitro. And then you can also, when we have our cell-seeded constructs, we can also pre-culture them in like an osteogenic media that will induce their differentiation. So of the dental mesenchymal cells and the dental epithelial cells, we're just conducting an experiment with some 3D printed constructs that we got from a collaborator at Columbia. And you can pre-treat these cell-seeded constructs with a in vitro media that will induce them, that will get them kickstarted to differentiate. Then you can move them into an in vivo model, and they'll continue to grow to do that.
Interesting. So, in my field, it was very in vogue. Like it's still happening. To remove wisdom teeth and like save them for stem cells, like stem cell banking.
Yeah.
Is there any credence to that, or is that
Yeah. So, I know that there are a lot of tissue banks that are around. There's a big one in Newton, and I was contacted by a few of them after our first publication in 2002. And at the time, my concern is that we didn't have a very good way of testing the viability of that pulp tissue that people wanted to cryopreserve. So whole tooth cryopreservation, you have to make sure then that your cells inside, that are housed inside this mineralized tissue, are being cryopreservation is an art, and it has to be a very careful cooling of the cells, and to make sure that the cells are still viable, that ice crystals don't form that would disrupt, that would, basically blow up your cells, disrupt them. And so I was never convinced that we really understood how to do that reproducibly. And the other concern I have is that oftentimes if you have a baby tooth, which parents are, wanted to cryopreserve the pulp in those cells, oftentimes by the time you convince the child to let you pull their tooth, there's not much left there, right? It's pretty dried up. It's pretty desiccated. And so um, being able to test the viability, 1 in 10,000 of those dental pulp stem cells, the dental pulp cells are stem cells, 1 in 10,000. So if you don't have much tissue there, the chances of you having viable stem cells, and those are the ones that can proliferate, the differentiated cells will just die off. It is very low. And so in my estimation, I'm very conservative about this stuff. I don't want people wasting their money and energies and hopes on tissues that might not be useful for them in the long run, because it's expensive. It's an expensive proposition. Without those kinds of tests to really reliably test the viability, I wasn't interested in participating in those efforts. Um, the other issue is that if you do have a genetic mutation and you are thinking of using those cells for that, those cells are going to also harbor the genetic mutation. Now, these days, with all the CRISPR Cas9 genome editing, targeted genome editing that you can do, you can correct those mutations and then use those cells. But you can also take adult cells and you can use them to form, induced pluripotent stem cells, and then you can differentiate them how you want. So, I mean, I think these days there are a lot of alternatives to that tissue banking.
Yeah. one of the things you just mentioned is just the idea of gene editing, which I think is still something that blows my mind. Um, but I feel like hasn't really trickled down to stuff that I see on a daily basis. Like, for example, people with craniofacial disorders, right? Like, if you have like a craniofacial syndrome, like cherubism, right? Which
Yeah.
is a known craniofacial disorder. We know the gene that causes it. We know the protein that is inappropriate.
Yeah.
Um, why is it that those genetic uh, mutations or uh, errors are not being fixed right now?
Yeah.
What is the reason why gene therapy or gene therapy has a, I know you told me before, has a very it's a very loaded term.
Yeah.
Or why is that kind of genetic technology not helping people like that?
I mean, I think people are being very careful about it. Certainly, you want to have it really well vetted in an animal model before bringing it into humans. You don't want to cause more damage than help. But that being said, there are a lot of new therapies that are being used to treat, and lots of craniofacial anomalies like craniosynostoses, um, alveolar tissue regeneration. Again, just coming back from this DOC TRC retreat or C doctor retreat, there are a lot of therapies for nerve regeneration, for um, vascular genesis, lots of dental products, lots of craniofacial. It used to be, and Rena D'Souza is the current director of the NIDCR, calls the head like the floating head because it's often not considered to be connected to the body. Insurance is different. It's just kind of treated mental illness or mental health issues are kind of not covered appropriately. Dental health is not accessible to all people. It's kind of just considered an afterthought, kind of almost dental insurance, health insurance, and things like that. But I think that these treatments are becoming approaches to use all these genome editing and more novel techniques are being applied to the craniofacial complex. It's just you just don't want to cause more harm than, I mean, these poor patients are already suffering from so much, and we still have a lot to learn.
Yeah.
Um,
I think growth to me is more interesting. Like rather than, fixing these genetic issues, growth to me, I feel like that's like a uh really significant
Intervention.
intervention. Yeah. So
Yeah.
like for example, like, even and that has intervention that has applications all the way down to even general dentists. Like for example, like somebody that's placing an implant, if it's been a dentist for a long time, the bone is shrunk away. Hopefully we can grow that bone. But is that like a tangible goal
Oh
for
yeah.
us?
Oh yeah. There were two different products that were being presented at this resource center retreat that I was just at for that purpose, to uh, actually augment failed implants in particular to kind of try to shore them up um, after they had a jaw bone resorption due to periimplantitis. And I mean, I think some of these therapies, though, suffer from the persistent issues that we've had in the oral cavity forever: caries and periodontal disease, right? And we still don't have these are serious health issues. They're very prevalent, widespread among young and elderly people, more in elderly people perhaps. And we really can't fix it right now. And so, I mean, you can do physical debridement and things like that, but it comes back again, right? It comes back again. It's kind of um, and some people are more susceptible to others. It's not just oral hygiene. It is a genetic, probably predisposition that they have. And so finding therapies that might be caries resistant, like replacement teeth that are caries resistant, or better implants that are periodontitis or periimplantitis resistant, by combining cell-based components and synthetic components in like new state-of-the-art replacement teeth, I think would be a huge improvement to
Yeah.
current therapies.
Yeah. For my aspect, I look at, rather than just the alveolar bone, one step forward, which is just the overall jawbone in general. Like, for example, orthognathic surgery, which is where we
Yeah.
make cuts into the jawbone, move it forward, move it backward to accommodate for errors in growth, right? I would love to not have to do that and just grow the jawbone in the direction that I want to. And there's been like a lot of attempts to do that, like this technique called distraction osteogenesis,
Right.
which is like where you make a cut and then you slowly grow the callus that forms in between the jawbone. But I look forward to the day where regenerative medicine can grow things where I want to grow things. Do you think
Mhm.
that that's coming?
I do. I
Yeah.
definitely do. I definitely do. Maria Trulis really kind of spearheaded that osteogenesis, distraction osteogenesis, along with Len Cabin at Mass General. One of the products at this resource center retreat was to have kind of an automated version of that, where your device could be implanted internally and remotely controlled, so you didn't have parents like forwarding the screw a millimeter a day, and you wouldn't have any scar tracks, because
Yeah.
in your cheeks it would be all internal and inside.
Yeah.
And again, they're combining really sophisticated electronics
Yeah.
and micro instrumentation.
Yeah, it's funny. I presented that to a surgical implant company in residency. I called it guided growth.
Ah,
They didn't go for it at
they
all.
didn't
They're
like
like,
it.
there's no way that's gonna work.
How long ago was that?
That was 10 years
Yeah,
ago. Yeah.
see?
I've been out for a bit. But anyway, it's
No, but
interesting.
I think now
Yeah.
companies are interested in it. So
Yeah.
companies that were traditionally just like dental material suppliers
Right.
are getting into regenerative medicine.
That's all.
We obtained $100,000 donation from Delta Dental because they appreciate the regenerative space. They know, I mean, I think I'm really happy that um, clinicians and patients are 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 appreciating the fact that natural tissues, tooth tissues, are better than anything else that you can get. You don't just want to pull all your teeth and get a full set of implants or anything like that, for all sorts of reasons, but most importantly, that it's not healthy. It's not as healthy as your natural teeth.
Yeah. Yeah. But also it's like it's exciting to watch, even just as a bystander, to see the advancements that are coming out. I remember when I was in dental school and when I was in residency, I looked at like the opportunity to bring something to market or even to develop some sort of new technology as like this long convoluted process that like I had to devote my entire life to. And I don't really think that's the case anymore. And that's why
No.
I would, I would advise anybody who's interested in research to really jump in, because you
Yeah.
could really get in now with the technology that we have now, make something of significance, and that could be just the beginning of your story. And I feel like I see that, especially at this DenTech conference. There's so many young people there that
Oh
were
yeah.
presenting.
Yeah.
That was pretty impressive.
You young people are the future. You young people are the future. And, you know, the old people like me can't do it, can't do it. I mean, we need the clinical expertise, we need the drive, we need the energy, we need the ideas. Like, you guys see in the clinic what you have to fix and
Yeah.
what really bugs you, that, oh man, we need a better way to do whatever it is. um and certainly, so I strongly encourage anybody that's interested in research, go talk to Dr. Doherty, get submit a research proposal, get support for that, for a summer project or beyond. Approach people like me in the field, or anybody, to try to see if you can just fit in as much time as you can to do research. It's kind of a nice break from the didactic work that you do. And
So, I mean, this is, we're producing this podcast as part of the continuing education department. So
yeah,
there's going to be a lot of people that are listening to this that are working in private practice
yeah,
and have an inkling for research. And honestly, I still think there's opportunity for them, or even to make a transition
Certainly.
later on in their career to work for a biotech company or something like that that has an interest in the dental space, wouldn't you say?
Oh, certainly, certainly. So two things. One is that if clinicians that have private practices are working in group practices, are available to test some of these products, not in people, of course, but just handling them or packaging, any sort of feedback about tools that you use to apply it. That's really important feedback, because right now for our product, we're trying to figure out, well, how best to package it, what's the form factor, how to, sterilize it, what sort of a tube do clinicians want? Do they want a tool to apply it or use their own tools? All this stuff is just really, really important and helpful. And secondly, as far as the regenerative field is concerned, there are now a lot of online journals that don't require you to have access to a university library and PubMed and things like that, where they're open access online journals that are specifically devoted to um, combining a clinical dental related problem with a potential solution, either through genetics or through biomedical engineering. So JADA Frontier Science is one of them. Again, I'm an associate editor for the journal, but that's one of the new journals that is online, widely accessible, to clinicians and lay people and basic research scientists both. But it's to make this dialogue become more easy, because we have a lot of jargon, and certainly clinical fields have, it's not jargon, things that are not as familiar to like the basic scientists. And so it's to make the dialogue be more easy so that we understand what each other are talking about. And I have to say, in the past 20 years, I've learned a whole lot more than I did originally about dentistry and medicine. And it's fascinating to me to realize that's why they do it this way. And but the other kind of a problem in moving new therapies forward is that there's always a delay, right? So when you're teaching students, for example, you have materials that you're using, that are used to using. You have stockpiled the material, you have um, protocols that you're using. And so I think working with these dental materials companies and dental suppliers to say, all right, why don't you take back all that old material, and here's a new, better material that you can use the same way, but try this out for us instead. And I think that way it's going to be a win-win, both for the dental materials companies, the dental suppliers, as well as the students.
I agree, and it's interesting to watch. I think that the whole genetic field right now is interesting to watch. CRISPR and regenerative medicine, longevity, all of these things that to me seemed like science fiction 20 years ago
Yeah.
are now like really trickling down to becoming actualities.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it reminds me like a lot of other times when this particular field or another particular field just got a really whole bunch of interest, whether it was like physics in Einstein's time or, one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about was Charles Darwin. I
Yeah.
feel like he was a rock star of his time, right? He
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
publishing and he
Yeah.
was going around. How do you feel about Charles
Well, he's a controversial character, like any trailblazer is, right? So natural selection is not something that many people wanted to hear about. They didn't want to hear that they evolved from single-celled, amoebas or whatever it is. And so, you know, he was a trailblazer, clearly, traveled the world when he was very young and did all these unusual things, and one of which was to look at diversity in the finches, so Darwin's finches, which weren't really called that. I mean, he really didn't care about the finches apparently as much as some other kinds of birds, but just to look at natural selection. So the way animals adapt to their environment. So there are these population of finches that Some of them have smaller beaks, some of them have larger beaks, all these different kinds of finches. Well, then if there's an environmental disaster where their food becomes harder and they need stronger beaks to be able to eat it. Well, all the weak beaked birds are going to die off. And then you're going to be left with this population of strong beaked birds that will then, you know, take over the population because the other birds are gone. Another really lovely example of that are the diversity of cichlid jaws. So cichlids are a little fish, kind of similar, not really similar to zebrafish, but another beautiful genetic fish model in Lake Malawi, which is in Eastern Africa. There are different jaw morphologies of these cichlid fishes depending on the environment that they're living in. So some of them live in areas that have lots of rocks. Some of them are in more open areas. Some of them have different predators that are in different parts of the lake. And so if a predator would constantly attack the cichlid fish from the left side because the fish were looking to the right and didn't see them, eventually all those fish are going to die off. But there are going to be some fish that evolve to look towards the left instead. And so you're going to see that population of fish eventually take over because they can fight back to their predators. So it's just a beautiful example of how, depending on, you know, your food that's available, the terrain that you're living in, your predator population, it's going to be natural selection for the individuals, the animals that can survive the environment. And that's just a beautiful example of genetics in real life.
The reason why I was saying that is because, there's a, a theory or philosophy that's floating around in the biological anthropology community that says that our jaws are shrinking because of the advent of agrarian economy and industrialized food production. So we're not chewing as much, and so our jaws are not growing to their fullest capacity. Do you think there's a genetic component to that, or is it mainly
Yeah.
just the environmental?
No, I mean, I think that the genetics adapt to the environment, right? So it's definitely clear that our jaws are not as big as they used to be on Neanderthal, but they don't have to be, right? And how that selection, I mean, it's probably modulated gene expression. It's not a whole new set of genes. It's just how they're expressed, right? Um, but I think that we're taller than our ancestors were. We are healthier than we live longer. Um,
Yeah, a lot of different genes being expressed differently, would you say?
yeah.
Yeah. No, another reason why I wanted to bring up Charles Darwin is because you were right in that he's a trailblazer. He was like super popular during his time. He obviously produced a book which you brought with you.
Yeah.
Actually brought a
I had to
copy of the
bring
book
my
with
copy
you.
over, yeah, because I knew you were excited about
Yeah,
him.
thank
Yeah.
you. But who are you reading that you feel like is a trailblazer right now in the science community? Like, what are you interested in? I feel like you're on the forefront of this field that is on everybody's minds. But what are you reading?
Well, I certainly read a lot of science, a lot of research all the time, and I'm so grateful for being in this field. I'm so impressed by so many of my colleagues that I'm just so happy to have the opportunity to be exposed to them. Actually, right now I'm reviewing grants for, it's called an NIH Directors Innovators grants,
Mhm.
and it's for these up and coming young people that it's not a traditional grant, but they just have an idea and they have a lot of training and like just a novel brainstorming idea, similar to Darwin, that they want to, you know, uh, follow up on an hypothesis about how cancer cells metastasize or tumors form in the first place, and then how they metastasize, something that hasn't ever been done before. I'm constantly humbled by how brilliant these young, some of them are clinicians, some of them are basic scientists, some of them are clinician scientists. It's just amazing that they have come up with these observations and want to test them. So that's just really exciting. Another thing I have to mention though is my daughter is very interested, and my late husband was very interested in science fiction. And there's a lot of really exciting science fiction books, certainly, TV series and things like that too, that are also, to me, very exciting about possibilities and improvements that can be made to our
Absolutely.
lives
Yeah.
without hurting anybody else.
Yeah.
Um,
Especially utopian science fiction. That's my favorite. I have another
uh,
podcast,
oh,
futurism and science fiction and stuff like that. It's so inspiring. Some of the stuff that people are coming out with.
it's really fun. It's really fun. The good part of it, of course, not the evil parts of
Right.
of mishandling these technologies and things like that. But I agree with you with what you said at the very beginning. I think it's a very exciting time to be in this field. And actually I've been excited about this for quite a while, I have to say.
Yeah, I know. It's
I guess in
we're just catching up
retrospect.
with you, right? Yeah. Well, thanks so much for, this sharing this time with us and giving us an insight to some really significant dental breakthroughs that are going to be coming down the pipeline, but also just the overall view of where we're at from a research perspective. Uh, Really, really appreciate it. For those of you guys who want to connect with Dr. Yelick, feel free to look her up in the Tufts directory. Is there anything else that you
Easy.
wanted to talk about?
Just thank you. Thank you for this
You're
opportunity.
very
It's
welcome.
really fun to be here. And thank you all for listening. And please do reach out. Email pamela.yelick@tufts.edu, as you guys all know, and look forward to working with you, hearing from you.
So feel free to like and subscribe. Our next episode is going to be coming out next month. So look forward to that. And we will see you guys on the next episode. Have a great day, everybody.